Hello everyone and welcome to the stream. So I mentioned on Kyle Ferguson's show a pretty interesting solo laning matchup that one of the top amateur teams regularly engages in, Ulaval. They are the Heroes of the Dorm team from, let me make sure I get this right actually, because I messed it up last time. Université Laval, which is in Canada. That's why I messed it up last time. And they actually run Vikings as a counter to Dehaka in the solo lane on Braxis holdout. This will work on other maps. It's been a really common cheese. It's called a cheese. I don't actually think of it that way. Common pick on Dragonshire for a long time against various comps, but you have to have a team that's practiced that specific thing a lot because you have two Vikings that actually solo top and Eric solos mid. And then you have a 4-man bot lane. Superstars likes to run it a lot with Faye on Vikings. There's a couple of other EU teams that used to do it quite a bit because Lost Vikings was always much more in the EU meta than it was in their sections. But this idea that Vikings can be together as 3 people and manage a solo lane against certain matchups and win is actually really important. And Blizzard has stated actually that they're considering a talent redesign for Lost Vikings that is going to put them in a position to be together, and as opposed to just having them be heroes that split up and allow your 4-man to always be together. They've considered doing some different things in their talent rework to allow them to be together. Right, so we're not going to be studying the entire game. We are just going to be studying this particular solo laning matchup. We don't know the draft, for instance, or what was going on, but it is going to be... I don't know what level this particular game is at. We're just going to focus on the matchup itself. So we have the red team, the villains, versus Ulaval, our heroes, the blue team, with the Lost Vikings. And we're going to study... It should be top lane. It should be all 3 Vikings versus Dehaka. When I mentioned this on Kyle Ferguson's show, we had a dedicated individual on Twitter, Awkward Human, who went back and looked for VODs because he really wanted to. It was such a cool idea, he wanted to study it, and he couldn't find it. Apparently, the Heroes type VODs weren't available, and Ulaval has not run it in dorms yet. They haven't had an opportunity to do so. So I contacted Electromad. Shout out to Electromad, by the way. And he actually sent me this replay. I was asked, do you have a copy of the replay? Or a replay where you guys do this strategy. And he was like, yeah, sure, here. And he just emailed it to me. So we're seeing some Sylvanas cheese. Notice that this is actually just a general strategy. Whenever you're up against a Sylvanas, you have to expect Sylvanas cheese. The reason that they're positioned here is because normally bottom is the 4-man purely by convention. There's no reason that bottom is the 4-man and top. Like they're basically mirrored. There's no reason at all to have it be that way. It's just been the way it's worked out. So if you know that the bottom is typically the 4-man and you have a Sylvanas, well, you might go top because there's only going to be one person there, and then suddenly you can get a free tower, and the 4-man is going to rotate up to deal with you. On this map, it's actually not efficient to do that. Even if the enemy team has a Sylvanas, you should just push. Hammer, Sylvanas disables the buildings, but Hammer Zarya actually pushes harder because Hammer can do it from out of range, and Zarya can turn the shots into free energy to push the wave up. The rotational distance makes it not worth it. You're actually going to fall behind. We saw GFE do this at the Western Clash, where they went 4 top because they had a better push comp. And Fnatic, even though they had a worse push comp, stayed bottom and just pushed because you lose out on the value of the time it takes you to rotate. It's better just to push, trade forts, and then try and set yourself up for a position to win the beacons when they come up. But we see that they were here and they got out thunk because the enemy team just went straight bottom. And all of this is really interesting now, but we're actually just going to wait until Dehaka burrows out here. He does get overpowered here. He does have his W available, which means he should just be able to walk his way out. He gets the kill, and he burrows. They get the kill into Hammer, and then he just burrows out. So now we have the matchup. This is where we're going to spend the rest of the game in this top lane. Vikings versus Dehaka. For those of you who are not familiar with the 3 different Vikings, Olaf has a shield. He's really tanky. He has a relatively slow attack. He's kind of like the warrior of the trifecta. He has a gap closer on an 8-second cooldown, which has no in-game information whatsoever. There's no like cooldown timer on the bar or anything. But if you're a good Vikings player, you can click on a target and you'll actually boom, like do a short range charge to them. He's a talent at 16 that causes this charge to stun. So Blizzard, if you're watching this, give us an in-game indication of Olaf's charge, please. Balog has a cone area attack. It hits a target and then splits out. So he has the wave clear. He's the wave clear of the Vikings comp. And Eric has a slingshot and is the lowest health. And he's just really annoying. You can make talent Eric into being even more annoying, give him increased movement speed and regeneration while moving. But baseline, he's basically just someone you have stand there and do nothing. He's really just a body. It's Olaf and Balog that are the stars of the show. That's because Eric's the leader. He's the manager. He doesn't do anything. He just tells them what to do. Anyone who's worked in an office can no doubt understand what I'm talking about when I say he doesn't do anything, but he's the manager. He's in charge. You can see that's the gap closer I'm talking about that Olaf just did. So the way this matchup is going to work is the Vikings all together do a pretty significant amount of damage. I know it sounds silly. It really does. But they do a pretty significant amount of damage. And here's where we start to talk about the way solo laning works. My objective in the future is to have this be a regular weekly show where we talk about solo laning. But Balog's slash damage at level 1 is 76. The splash damage is 38, which is actually pretty reasonable wave clear. Balog by himself has some of the best wave clear in the game on a single hero. And it's mana free, which is another huge consideration. But that's quite a lot of damage. That's 84 DPS at level 1 from Balog with his attack speed. We have, let's see, Eric's basic attack damage is 62. His DPS at level 1 is 89. And Olaf's is... Where are you, Olaf? Olaf. Where's Olaf's? Basic attack Olaf. There we go. 54, which gives him a DPS of 54 because his attack speed is once per second. You add those up and you actually get, what, 250-ish DPS from all 3 heroes. For reference, level 1 basic attack DPS for a hero that is considered a strong auto attacker, Greymane, is 203. And in Morgan form, that is in Morgan form. Morgan form is 203. So altogether, the Vikings, if they're all attacking the same target, actually have some of the highest sustained damage in the game. Now, the way solo laning works, and I've talked about this in a previous video, but we're going to go over it again. The number one priority is not to die, because you never want to miss soak. The number one priority when you're solo laning should be not to die. The second thing is to manage the lane. So how do you manage the lane? Well, if you have a melee hero who has good wave clear, they want to get on top of that person, or get on top of the wave and clear it and then back up, right? If they have a ranged hero who has good wave clear, they want to try and poke and clear the wave. But what if you're a melee hero against a ranged hero? Then maybe you do something where you poke the melee hero and make it cost them to get to the wave. And if they can't get to the wave, then it doesn't get cleared as fast. But let's say the waves meet in the middle, and Dehaka's forced all the way back to this arc, right? This is where his towers keep him relatively safe, except for Eric and Balog, who can still poke him. If he's out of XP range here, then you don't clear the wave. You let the minion versus minion combat happen naturally, and every minion that dies here to the minion versus minion combat, and Dehaka's not in range for it, you miss that soak. This is called freezing the lane. If you don't have good wave clear, but you have good sustain or good poke damage, and you're against heroes who don't have good sustain and don't have a gap closer or some kind of ranged ability, you can always freeze the lane against them. You can just sit in the bush. If they step up, you hurt them, and then they're forced to back up. Right? This is why the sustaining solo laners have always been so strong, because you can't freeze them out of the lane. This is actually the correct way to play against Vikings, for instance. You should freeze the lane. You should focus on trying to kill the Viking, keep the Viking back and in the 2 lanes where the 4-man is not. Because also it means you can hide in the bush consistently. The enemy team doesn't know exactly where you are, so the 4-man might not rotate and kill you. This is... so you have essentially 3 archetypes in the solo laning matchup. You have bullies, who try and freeze the lane and keep the enemy person away. You have anti-bullies. These are heroes that, through some mechanic, are impossible to bully out of lane. Either they have really high health, they have a massive escape where you can never, ever kill them. They can always get it. Or they have such amazing wave clear that they can just be like 1 second, the wave is gone, and they just back up. And their range is so high that you can't get to them. Some combination of those 3 mechanics is more normally the case. Zag has movement speed on creep, so it's really hard to get to her. She can clear the wave from literally off screen with volatile acid and get credit for it. And she has the ability to put a Hydra on you to make any attempt to go in on her cost something. Right? Zag is one of the best anti-bullies and one of the best bullies, or at least she used to be one of the best bullies because of her sustain ever. And then you have sort of a third category. It's a little bit weird. It's the raw push. The raw push category. I refer to them as siegers, right? There's heroes that can clear the wave so fast and then start sieging directly on your building. They tend to be specialists that if you don't have direct kill potential on them and they can put enough damage on you to force you to back up, you lose. You just lose the lane. You start losing buildings. And obviously keeping them off your buildings is a really high priority. The reason that this show is going to focus a lot on Dragonshire, Tomb of the Spider Queen, and Braxis in general is because those are the solo lane matchups that go for a long time. Right? They go for a long time. Up to level 7, 8, 9 is pretty common on those maps. Basically, Dragonshire, the solo lane exists until one team loses a fort, because it's worth it to stay up there until the fort's dead. And you have the fountain's gone, so you have better control of that top shrine. On Braxis, you pretty much always need someone on the point, right? And you always have this conflict of forming rotation. On Tomb of the Spider Queen, since the objective is physically in lane, you never want to miss any of those gems. So you stay in the solo lane until it's not safe to stay in the solo lane anymore, because you always want the gems. So the solo lane show will focus primarily on those 3 maps, because anyone can kind of hold a lane for the minute and 40 seconds till the first objective on most maps. In a 1v1 scenario. In a 3v1 scenario, then hopefully the rest of your stuff is doing stuff on the map. Oh, thank you, DJ Tiger. I appreciate that. So, this is the first episode of a solo laning show. That's kind of a brief summary of solo laning. Solo laning is actually pretty complicated. Some of the matchups change, like with certain talents, different levels. But this is our first highlight. This is Lost Vikings versus Dehaka on Braxis Holdout. And you can see Dehaka is trying to abuse his wave clear to be a soul winner. This not only gives him sustain, because it gives him essence, and it gives him the globe. Globes are also a really important aspect of soul laning. If you can freeze someone out of the globe every single time, but not necessarily freeze them out of clearing the wave, you will eventually win a poke war if they don't have a sustain mechanic built into their kit. It's actually... Globe management is actually a really big deal, but I could talk about that for 10 minutes and I'm not going to do it. And you can see Saramir's trying. As soon as his wave clear is not available anymore, he backs up. And notice how much damage he's taking. So here's the thing. Here's the thing about Dehaka and his sustain. He has a global. He can always Hearth and come back at full health and full mana. He has the essence. Unfortunately, we can't actually click on him in the Blizzard default UI to talk about how his self-healing works. So what we're going to see, and this is another aspect of practice. See how Saramir is managing the globe here? We see the Viking player sent one Viking to sort of get the globe, but Saramir is on top of it first, so he just got it. It's actually pretty significant. Again, there's stuff going on down here. None of this matters. We're in the solo lane. And we can see the kill pressure here. Saramir's trying to get kill pressure on a single Viking. And normally when you're next to a Dehaka and you don't have a massive self-sustain mechanic, you have to run away, right? But in the case of the Vikings, only one of them has to run away if you have really good micro. The rest of them can continue to auto-attack him. So Saramir is just going to continually take damage, continually try to clear the wave. But the Vikings lacking CC don't really have the potential to kill him because Dehaka's health is so high. He can always just Hearth, come back at full health. And the Vikings don't, have any special regeneration mechanics, or at least not yet. They can talent into one at level 4. We'll see if that happens. Notice he goes Olaf the Stout. This gives Olaf block, and he really is using Olaf as a tank. Olaf's job is to be on top of Dehaka all the time. Why did they send Balog check the globe? He was just closer. That's a small mistake. You should always have Balog on the wave if you are going to do this. You should always have Olaf on the hero, and you should always have Eric sharking around, capturing the point, or getting the globe, or whatever. Eric's kind of your scout. Especially if he goes Eric the Swift at level 4. We'll see what he actually ends up going here. And we can see the dash in. He actually uses Z here to dash into the fight. I don't think that was necessary. He puts Eric a little bit closer. Again, Eric and Balog are both ranged. There's no reason to have anyone but Olaf physically on the point. These are small micro mistakes that a lot of CLD players make. But especially if you have all three of them together, you should be body blocking and tanking and controlling the point with Olaf, and then rotating in the ranged if he does go after them. You don't want to have Eric that close. And see, he does back up Eric eventually. So now he has an interesting triangle, right? If Balog were up here and wasn't stutter stepping closer, Eric were here and Olaf were on the point, he could, if you chase this one, these two collapse from the back. If you chase this one collapses from the back. There's no situation where Dehaka can actually get a kill here if the micro is perfect. Balog is ranged. I thought it just splashed. Balog is ranged and it splashes. I think his range might be different. His range might not be standard. Let me actually double check that. It's a 4 range. So he has the same range that Cassia does currently. Where does Balog keep all his swords? It's one magical sword that reproduces. It's really difficult to properly micro anyone to body block. But yeah, we see the rotation here. Sylvanas. Dehaka's losing the lane. Dehaka's losing the lane so hard that someone actually has to come up and help temporarily to give them brief control of the point. But as soon as they see that, the 4-man immediately is like, oh, you don't have everyone here. We have this point now. This is our point. It's ours. This is why you never do this, by the way. The only reason to abandon the 4-man is if you're losing and you can't afford to lose both points, or if you have secured a kill and you're winning the 4-man so hard that you can afford to send someone up to help with the solo lane because it's a tie. This was 4v4. Both teams were pretty even, but a little bit more pressure here. The wall has gone down. The Sylvanas being here is a mistake, which is one of the reasons that it surprised our Vikings player, because you don't expect people to play badly as a general rule. The Sylvanas being there immediately allows this team to set up on the point and take it back. If Sylvanas had still been here, this probably would not have happened. This point would probably still be under control of the red team. Also, Quantum did not go Devil's Due at level 1. If he'd gone Devil's Due at level 1 and they were making an effort to control this globe turn-in, he would not be this slow. Sustaining Umbraxis really, really, really matters. Your solo lane winning doesn't matter as much if you're 4... I mean, it always matters, but if your 4-man's losing because they don't make the right decisions, it's bad. And eventually we're going to start to see, now that the point's active, there's a second dynamic that only applies on Dragonshire and Braxis Holdout that we're going to talk about, where you're not only wanting to control the wave, but you want to control the point. So there's two things you need to control. You need to keep this wave clear so it's off your towers and you get the experience. You don't lose shots on your towers, lose ammo, lose structure, give the enemy team an XP advantage. And you also need to control the point so that your team has objective control. This also applies to Dragonshire because you're trying to control that top temple, which is one of the reasons that these are the two maps where we see this solo lane Viking sort of thing happen. only Rexar can soak the lane and control the point, in addition to the Vikings. Vikings and Rexar are the only 2 heroes that can soak the lane and control the point. Right? Which is another reason that Rexar. It's really, really... Look at the mappings. That's right, look at the mappings. And so here we see this dynamic start to come into play. We have the wave clear hero constantly pushing the wave in the form of Balog, and now we have Olaf and Eric trying to control the point. So Saramir comes down here, controls the point, and he's like, Balog, go! Go, 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 go. Balog starts pushing the wave in. Saramir is going to have to leave this point momentarily, or he's going to start to miss some of this experience. And as soon as he leaves the point, Eric's back on the point. TLV was first used by FaZe as a counter to Rexar. Actually, TLV was used in EU on Dragonshire a year before FaZe started playing Vikings. But it does counter Rexar. If Viking grabs Globe, does it affect the other 2? They aren't in Globe range, like the Well? I believe so, yes. It's really important because Vikings trait is actually a Globe collection quest that gives them essentially a nerfed version of Regeneration Master. So getting Globes consistently as Vikings is actually really important. And here again we have Saramir on the point. This I don't like, by the way. I would prefer if Balog was pushing this wave in, making Saramir make a choice. That's how this matchup should work, but he's trying to put enough damage on to Dehaka to force him to back and use his global. We see the stun coming out. Bashi Baba is just going to run away and puts him back on the wave. Okay, this is exactly what he should have done. See the globe pick up. We're going to see him rotate and get the globe. This, again, is something Eric should be doing. There's no reason to have Balog be the one doing this. Oh, is that really why she learned TLV? That's funny. Didn't know that. I always thought FaZe is so mechanical. I thought she just picked up TLV for the hell of it at some point, and then her team needed it, so she actually started playing it in things. Then we see the Olaf charge again. This could be a kill, and if this were level 7, that would actually have been a guaranteed kill because of the spin to win. So here's something that doesn't apply to other maps. That applies to pretty much Dragonshire, Braxis, and to some degree Tomb of the Spider Queen. Most Soul Link matchups last about as long as the first objective spawn, and then they're intermittent, right? Battlefield of Eternity, you do have a Soul Link. Totally, you just have a Soul Link. But when the Immortal spawns, the Soul Link kind of goes away until the Immortal finishes, and then whoever was the Soul Link usually goes back. But not always. Sometimes Rag's your Soul Linker in the first part of the game, but then Rag's always good on the defense, so if you lost the Immortal, you're going to have Rag be up there. But the Soul Lane is changing and intermittent on other maps. On Braxis, it's pretty consistent. You're always going to be up against this person in your lane, whether that's top, and then once they get the fourth, they'll swap, and it'll be bottom. But the point is that the matchup goes from level 1 off until level 7, 8, 9, 10. Sometimes I've seen matchups in professional play as high as 16 or 17, where the Soul Lane dynamic held. Particularly on Dragonshire, where if a team's really good at rotations, they're going to be in a situation where the Dragon Knight never gets picked up, the fort never gets taken, and you have to stay in that lane to manage it. God damn it, Cav, get a sub button so I can throw my money at you. I will be setting up a Patreon this weekend. And I'll have show ideas on the Patreon and coaching options, so if you want to back me for that, you'll be able to do that. Anyway, moving on. I have a lot planned this weekend. I'm updating all the Warrior guides, too. Yeah. So, aren't you a GFE partner? I am on GFE. I don't think they've added me to the streaming thing yet on Twitch. I need to talk to them about that. Can't you just magically get a sub button through them? Twitch will only give you a sub button if you're a player on a team with an org, not if you're a content creator. But it does affect my next application. Basically, this is totally unrelated to the show, by the way. Basically, the way Twitch works is you have to have a certain number of viewers or have a certain impact on the community. So when I next apply for my sub button, Twitch will look at the fact that I'm a member of an org. Twitch will look at the fact that I've been streaming regularly, doing a show-style format instead of just like gaming streams, and they'll take all those things into consideration. Also, now I know someone at Twitch, so give me a couple months, I'll probably have a sub button. I'm working on it, guys. I'm working on it. Matchups. Laning matchups. Because these matchups go for so long, 4 and 7 talents can be considered. One of the ones that I think is really interesting is, for instance, Falstad against Dehaka. Falstad can't win the point against Dehaka. He can poke him forever, but he can't win the point because Dehaka can always just back off and then Hearth and come back in. Falstad needs to have kill potential on Dehaka before he can win the lane. He doesn't have kill potential until 7. He actually needs Boomerang to kill Dehaka. In a very similar way, the Vikings need Spin to Win to burst down Dehaka once he's been forced to use Burrow. So they actually get the kill here, but that would have been an absolutely guaranteed kill with Spin to Win, right? Dehaka stayed too long. He underestimated the amount of damage that the Vikings put out, and he just died. But if Spin to Win had been there, even if Dehaka had correctly assessed when he needed to back up, Spin to Win would have killed him. Spin to Win is an enormous amount of damage. It's actually terrifying how much 3 Vikings do with Spin to Win. And this is one of the ways we'll see Vikings used in team fights, right, in professional play. They'll have one Viking go into a bush behind the squishy line. They'll play again. All 3 Vikings come out of the bush, and then bada bing, bada boom, Spin to Win. The damage at level 7 per Viking is 133. So it's 400 burst damage, essentially. So obviously quite a lot. What about Nordic Attack Squad? Don't ever go Nordic Attack Squad. It's actually one of the only 2 talents in the Vikings tree that are strict traps. But still enough. No, there's no fix. The only fix that I'm going to have for the 16x9 or 16x10 issue is to buy new monitors. That's like the only realistic way to fix it. I should actually... So there's a bunch of projects in my house that we were spending money on that. We actually had to take out a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, to make sure all the projects for the house could be paid for. We had to place the windows. It's an old house. It was a fixer-upper when we bought it, but it's going to accrue greatly in value, so it's okay. So I haven't been spending money on the stream. I've been spending money on monitors or computers or anything. I actually, in the next 3 weeks, I think, should be able to buy new monitors and a new computer that will help with all the technical issues I've been having with streaming. So I have a fix temporarily for the 16th, I think, but I can't tab out when it's happening, so I only use it for casting at the moment. And here's where the Vikings definitively win the lane. Much like the Falstad matchup we were talking about earlier, Spin to Win gives a lot of free burst to the Vikings, and suddenly he actually has kill potential on Dehaka if the Dehaka makes a mistake. You notice Eric the Swift is also picked up here. We're not seeing perfect use of Eric. Eric should be like on top of this globe. Right? Every single time the globe's up, he should be on top of it. Not only to have it for his own quest and his own sustain, but to deny. Yeah, I have black lines because I have a 16x10 monitor, and Twitch only streams in 16x9. So when I send the 16x10 picture to Twitch, you get black lines. So it comes down here. Again, look, Saramir's trying to manage the globe here. He doesn't even pick up the globe. But he is going to be able to... And look at the movement speed. Spin to Win comes out. It is juked a little bit with the burrow, but Saramir goes down again. And this is going to happen continuously, especially now that the towers are gone. Notice that as soon as the towers died, he spent a lot of effort to push the lane all the way in. Once the towers are gone and the gate is gone, the retreat path is far more difficult. And for a melee hero who doesn't have an escape, that's a really, really, really big deal. And it's really the entire dynamic of the matchup. You have Balog clear the wave, you have Olaf stand on the point, you have Eric run around and be annoying, grabbing globes or anything. Again, a little bit of a mistake there. The reason especially you want to have Eric when doing this is because post level 4 he has that 10% movement increase and he regenerates 47 health per second while moving. So it's very difficult to do anything to Eric. You can use Eric to block skill shots. Like if Eric get dragged and then you just run away, he can't. Saramir's like, I kind of love how much you counter me in lane. He didn't know that. He didn't know that. Now we're seeing a standard Braxis holdout thing where after the first phase, the teams switch lanes. This fort's gone. So if you are winning the map and you manage to get the bottom fort, it makes sense to push your 4-man to the top lane because it forces the solo laner to switch. And the solo laner, we were just talking about it, Dehaka has a lot more pressure because there's no longer a safety mechanism here. There's no safety mechanism here. If you're winning the 4-man and then swap lanes, you're in a position where your solo laner now has an automatic advantage because you still have a gate and the enemy team doesn't. That's just a Braxis hold that thing.
Hero slain.
That Aurel 7 talent? Solo laning matchup. We're not even talking about the other team. We're talking about Dehaka Vikings. That's it. We have no other comments other than the fact that Leoric shouldn't have gone Willing Vessel and Dehaka should have gone Devil's Tooth. Clearly Cam wouldn't fit in the second background work. I could do something like that. For casting purposes, though, I really do need it to be 16:9 anyway. So I might as well just get new monitors. I can actually basically sell the monitors I have for what it would cost to buy new ones, ironically. Now we're going to see... You thought Leoric TLV was going to be the matchup? No. Although, for the record, I think TLV would win that. I think Leoric would lose to TLV in lane. But Leoric has a better escape, so I don't think he would actually ever die. We're still going to see Eric be a little bit split here. And this is something you can start to do in the later game. Again, Eric's not that critical to the solo laning matchup, and especially if you go play again, you can always have Eric be with your team. It doubles the globe generation. Well, triples it in some ways because he can, get this one as well. And if you go play again, you can suddenly have your entire team there for a team fight. So you can have Eric just flanking, being on the wings. It's very micro intensive though. Who beats TLB? Zag. There's lots of heroes that can just out push Lost Vikings. It makes it really, really, really difficult. You either need to be able to move faster than them or have some sort of sustain mechanic, though, because of the amount of damage that they can put out. Ranged heroes are going to have a pretty easy time kiting them and tying them. Butcher actually would not necessarily be bad because he could try and farm the Lost Vikings. I'm actually not sure who would win Butcher versus Lost Vikings at a high level of micro. I don't know who would win that. Because I don't think any of the TLB would die. Is Zul still played? Zul's never played as a... Zul is rarely, if ever, played as a solo laner. And it is almost always a mistake to play him as a solo laner. Red team's doing something dumb here, by the way. They're way too far forward contesting this point. They just need to be soaking 10. They are not on top of this wave, which means they're making a mistake. Which is making this look really easy for the Vikings right now. And you can see we see Eric doing Eric things. This is why Eric's so annoying, especially with Eric the Swift at 4. Unless you have a slow or some kind of gap closer, you can't catch up to him. He can put damage on you for free. And again, we're seeing spin to win and then back up. And he's chasing Balog, but Balog can run away. Eric's pinging him from the back. Olaf's on the point. He tries to go back to the point. Now he has to deal with Olaf. And it's just like over and over and over and over again. Because of Symbiosis, right? Because of this talent at level 7 from Dehaka, if all the Vikings are grouped up, then the Vikings should lose. Right? They should absolutely lose. But as long as he doesn't group them up to give Dehaka the Dark Swarm resets from all 3 of them counting, because they each do count. You can see he gives it right here. He's going to have Dark Swarm available here in just like a second. He does it again. Vikings should lose right here. But then they boat. And this is the advantage of going boat over play again. If you have the boat post 10 in the solo laning matchup, you can bait someone into thinking they're going to be able to kill all the Vikings with area abilities, and particularly against the Dehaka. And then you can just hit boat, and you suddenly have another health bar, and you kill them. So if you're doing this on Braxis Holdout, or sometimes even on Dragonshire, and you're solo laning as the Vikings, boat is a really, really good pickup. Particularly on Dragonshire, I think because the upgrade at 20 is so strong. If you're not going to go Fury of the Storm to have tri-lane pressure with each individual Viking taking a lane in the late game, it's better to go boat and boat upgrade when you're using Vikings as a solo laner like this. Again, this is not a normal standard way to use Vikings, but it is a really interesting matchup. And you can see again, this is the rotation of the Viking. This is the other aspect of the Vikings. In the late game, when you do win the point, normally you don't ever want to miss soak. We talk about break points where your team gets significant advantages, like getting 10. Maybe you want to group up and turn your lead into structures if you're 10 to 8. But ideally, you would never miss soak in any lane ever. And we see professional teams prioritize globals highly in the draft to make sure that they can do that. Make sure they can always beat a fight and be in a lane. It's one of the reasons that Abathur is really popular on some maps in professional play. MB Black used to run Abathur on Battlefield of Eternity, for instance, which is 2-lane map, but the middle portion, the Immortals part, lasts so long you can get a significant level advantage, even if you lose the Immortal if you have Abathur soaking. So here's another advantage of the Vikings, just in general in this solo lane matchup. You can send one Viking to push the off lane, and you can still have quite a bit of pressure from the other two Vikings and your 4-man when you do win the objective. This is one of the reasons that Vikings is considered a little bit cheesy overall when you're talking about like something like Dragonshire, because it basically gives you an extra body. Normally, if you wanted to soak every lanes, it would be 1-1-3. When you're pushing like a Dragon Knight or something, you'd be in a 1-1-3. In the case of Vikings, it's a 4 1/3 man push. So you get essentially, you're down a body in fights, but you're up a body in macro when you have Vikings on your team, which is a huge deal. This is why Vikings get better at the higher level your play, is because macro and correct rotations around Vikings matter significantly more. See again the globe pickup. This should be Balog. I don't like the fact that this is Olaf. If this were Balog, they would have a lot more push potential. It is post 7, so spin to win is available, but if you have the Vikings here, you're trying to save spin to win to potentially catch someone out of position and add some burst for your team. He does have both ranged heroes down here instead, just for the poke. That's why it's doing this with the melee hero at top. I don't think this is the right way to do it, personally, but there are arguments for both. And you can see that the solo laning dynamic is sort of continuing to exist. They're trying to bait boss here. Nice charge, nice root follow-up, but unfortunately the damage wasn't there to secure that kill. Maybe it's all because it's hardest to gank. I mean, honestly, they're all hard to gank, and especially post 13. This is, I think, Vikings' biggest power spike, actually, is jump. Vikings in the early game can be ganked relatively easily. They can be frozen out of lane relatively easily. But as the game goes on, it gets progressively harder to freeze Vikings out of lane because the objectives get so much stronger that your team has to go to the objectives. You don't have a choice anymore. The objective is so strong that if you just give it up to deal with Vikings, you're screwed. You're going to lose the objective and slowly lose the game because the Vikings, even if they get pushed back, if they played correctly, you're not missing soak. So jump, giving you 1.5 seconds of invulnerability combined with the Vikings mount that gives them the speedy escape, means that Vikings can suddenly start to really pressure lanes as opposed to just soaking them. This gets enhanced at 20 if you go Fury of the Storm. We see EU teams in particular frequently go Fury of the Storm at 20 when they have Vikings, because each individual Viking can then push a lane by themselves to the point where they can literally threaten keeps. Right? And that's all 3 lanes. You're essentially dealing with a siege specialist in all 3 lanes. How do you deal with 3 split pushing Gazlos and you still have to deal with a 4-man? Like, it's hard. It's just legitimately difficult to do. That happens a lot on Sky Temple, for instance, because every structure matters on Sky Temple more so than other maps. And we're seeing the rotation here. Hoshi Baba's coming down. He has boat, so he needs all the Vikings together to make that work. So as this fight's starting to happen, they have the talent to advantage, but jump, that survivability, is really important. We see a little bit of a misclick there. Hoshi Baba actually uses his charge, which again has an 8-second cooldown. This is why Olaf really needs a button to control this charge and a UI indicator to let you know when it's available. What else would you go at 20 and never go anything else? The upgrade to play again, where you come back after 10 seconds, is pretty good. And the upgrade to boat, if you went boat at 10, actually essentially doubles the damage of boat, which is pretty good, as it turns out. Fury of the Storm's really only good on the bigger 3-lane maps. where it's hard to respond to that level of split pressure, or the structures really matter. On 2-lane maps, you're not going to get that much value out of Fury of the Storm. And as mentioned, if you're using Vikings as a solo laner, boat can be a little bit better anyway, and then if you go boat, I think you should pretty much always go the upgrade to boat. You never really get any value out of the play again upgrade, then you're not YOLOing hard enough. This is a legitimate strategy. This is totally unrelated to soloing. There's a legitimate strategy that EU players will use where they'll pick TLV into Li Ming, and then they'll let all the Vikings split, and Li Ming has to kill them each individually, and she will run out of mana, and then they'll come back, and she'll kill them all again, and she'll be out of mana. And then Li Ming will be out of mana, and resets no longer matter. I'm not saying it's a good strategy, but some EU teams have used it to deal with to like abuse their strength at microing Vikings. I think Misfits did that once, not in HGC, but in a tournament last year. I don't recommend that as a strategy, by the way. But it worked. And then they all came back, and they were fine. Li Ming was out of mana. And again, not missing any soak, right? Despite the fact that they have won they're pushing in, they have a definitive advantage. They're winning team fights, they're just not missing any soak. That's sort of the end of the solo laning. That's just unnecessarily high-level micro. So unneeded. Lol. The solo lane matchup's pretty much over at this point. It's kind of interesting. Solo laning kind of ends when your team has an advantage, right? So once the fort's gone in the solo lane, it's usually not necessary to push it in anymore, as long as if you're ahead in a talent tier, you kind of want your team to be together. The one Viking being split is completely fine, and it should always be either Balog or Eric. Balog because it gives you more lane pressure, and Eric because he's harder to gank and he's less valuable in some ways, but I always prefer using Eric as a ward if I can, ideally, and using Balog to push the wave and using Olaf to kind of be with the team for play again. I usually go play again, but again, in this situation where you're using him as a solo laner, it's better to go boat. Any questions about solo laning, about this particular matchup? This ended up being a 40-minute stream about TLV versus Dehaka on Braxis. A lot of the same rules will apply on Dragonshire as well, though. And I don't think it's worth using TLV as a solo laner. Actually, that's not true. I like the idea of using TLV as a solo laner on Haunted Mines because he has Merklord. And you can actually soak as people go down in the mines to get skulls. If your team trades in skulls relatively evenly, but you never miss any soak because you have a Vikings, and you can get the camps, and you have the Merklord enhancement for the sappers, you'll actually get forts and walls during the first skull phase before the thing actually gets finished. And you can soak both lanes because you can send one Viking down. As a Rexar player, should I go the level 1 Q talent for Wave Clear versus TLV? It is physically impossible for Vikings, or anyone really, to bully Rexar out of lane if he goes the Wave Clear talent at 1. Because you can just you basically instantly clear the wave, right? You can't zone someone out of the experience. On the other hand, it's really difficult to zone Misha away already, especially with the heal. And far and away, Easy Prey is Misha's highest win rate level 1 talent. So if you're drafting Rexar with the intention of only tying the lane, I don't think that's good enough. Right? I think you need to draft Rexar with the intention of winning the lane. Which is why the Wave Clear talent, I think, is a little bit poor by comparison. It'd be really nice to know all the solo lane matchups, for example. People tend to always have a solo lane versus solo lane versus Dehaka got demolished by Lunara in a solo lane. Yep! There's a spreadsheet. There's a spreadsheet in the works, ladies and gentlemen, where I'm actually going to go over pretty much every solo laning matchup, and that's one of the intentions of this show. This one was studying a particular matchup because someone on Twitter requested specifically, and I had access to the replay, so I just did it. But as this show moves forward, we're actually going to pick a hero who's considered a solo laner, or who can solo lane, and go over all their matchups, and eventually I will be publishing a spreadsheet that has all of the matchups. But as a general rule, if you're a melee hero, you'll get dumpstered by ranged heroes in the solo lane, even if they're not normally considered a solo laner. So, if like a good Vala will beat a Dehaka in lane. It's not easy, but you will do it. A good Falstad will, beat Dehaka in lane. Eventually, he'll have kill pressure at 7. We talked about that. Lunara will beat Dehaka in lane. In order for a melee hero to beat a ranged hero who is microed correctly in lane, they need to have a gap closer. So Sonya hits her spear, she can beat a ranged hero in lane. Sonya misses her spear, she loses. Dehaka does not have a gap closer. So if you're microing, you take 0 damage and can poke forever. Right? Artanis has to hit a swap to beat a ranged hero in lane. If he misses a swap, he can't win. He cannot win the lane. He can tie the lane. He can not die and soak the wave, but he can't win the lane. It's just not possible. But that's a micro thing, so that applies to different levels of play. And I've done bronze level replay reviews on this stream where we saw Lunara losing lane to Dehaka because Lunara just stood there and auto attacked the Dehaka, and the Dehaka just walked up and dragged her and pulled her back, and she died. We did it. We saw a gold level one where that didn't happen anymore. So it's just there's a skill difference there in understanding the strengths of a matchup. But hopefully, content like this will help more people understand it in a more articulate, clear way, and then they can use those concepts to apply it to other matchups. The problem with Dehaka versus Lunara specifically is that Dehaka gets free damage. Yeah. Yep, Lunara will win almost any lane and is very resistant to ganks because of Wisp. If there's no gap closer or poke damage on the melee hero. So Dehaka is like the ultimate example of a lane that Lunara is golden in. But if she dodges Sonya's spear, she can beat Sonya. I shouldn't say beat. I should say tie. And this is something that I'm going to have to be really, really careful about when I'm doing these shows. Because there's different ways of thinking about the solo lane, but the way I like to think about it is if you can get structure damage or kills, you're winning the lane. Yeah, she can never win versus Thrall. That's absolutely true, because he'll just poke you down and you can't outdamage his sustain. If you can get a kill, or if you can clear the wave and get them so low that they're forced to back so they miss a wave, or you can get structure damage, you are winning the lane. If you can not, and on maps like Braxis and Dragonshire, if you can not miss soak while getting the objective, you're winning the lane. So those are your 4 win conditions. Lunara can't win the lane versus Dehaka. Lunara can just put so much pressure on Dehaka that he's forced to use his global to keep backing up, but she can't lose the lane. And being unable to lose the lane is a really big deal. Post 7, Falstad can win the lane because he has kill pressure. Post 7, Vikings can win the lane because they have kill pressure. Right? So that makes a big difference, and it's an important dynamic to think about because it changes over time. Chen beats Thrall in lane, but Chen demolishes Thrall in lane post 4 if he takes Ring of Fire. Thrall gets to a point where the wave gets cleared so fast that he cannot stop structure damage without dying because he can't sustain through Chen's damage plus the minion wave's damage if he tries to stand in front of his towers and make sure they don't waste shots. It gets to a point where Thrall just gets dumpstered. I've had games on Chen where I was winning the lane, I hit 4, and before we hit 10, I'd gotten the entire fort. And because no one came to help the Thrall, but like Thrall was just there, he was doing his best, he was playing correctly even, but he was losing the lane. So Chen versus Thrall is an example of a matchup where you can just straight up win the matchup. But there's a lot of matchups where you can only tie, but what's wrong with tying? Like, tying is a pretty good deal when it comes to thinking about the fact that on a 2-lane map, you're essentially tying 50% of the map for your team. And on a 3-lane map, you're winning like 33% of the map for your team. It's kind of a big deal. And I will have a more detailed video on breaking down solo laning. I'm working on a script for it right now. I want it to be like clear and concise. That will be uploaded to my YouTube. And it'll be a precursor to this more regular weekly show that I'm planning on solo laning, specifically going over these matchups. Any other questions? Rag versus Greymane solo lane. How does this go? Rag wins. Rag has sustain, Greymane doesn't. And Greymane's poke is not greater than Rag's sustain. So you can just keep pushing in, and there's nothing Greymane can do about it. As a rule, if a hero doesn't have... If a hero has sustain, you have to be able to out-wave clear them in order to tie the lane. Or you have to be able to put damage on them and not be able to receive damage in return. Rag has W, so you can't put damage on him without putting damage in return, and the damage does not exceed his sustain. So he auto-wins the lane if he plays correctly. The danger to Rag is that he lacks an escape, so if you can bait him into overextending, your team can rotate up and gank him, but that's the only way that Rag's going to realistically lose a lane versus Greymane. That's still plus Volatile team lacks super damage. Their Vol is actually pretty bad. It's kind of funny. This number should be the highest in the game. If you're a good Vola player, with very few exceptions, you will never have the lowest damage of anyone, ever. So if Vola were actually keeping up with the Syl, like if this Vola player was as good at Vola as the Sylvanas player clearly is at Syl, this game would be pretty one-sided. Vola does literally enough damage to carry an entire team. If you have just Vola for your damage dealer and you have a shielder to like keep her up, or even sometimes double support, we saw Malfarial once at Gold Club World Championship. Vola is enough damage for an entire team when she can be played aggressively. So that's just a Vola problem. Part of the problem is she didn't go multi-shot build, and so they lack burst. One of the reasons that Punishment is picked up at 4 is because it gives Vola a burst option. She already has enough sustain damage. She doesn't need to enhance it with Creed of the Hunter. Creed of the Hunter is honestly pretty bad on average. The only time I think it can be justified is if you have a Tassadar or some other sort of life leech effect. But post 7 with quest completed, that's not fair to say. But maybe that's true, but that's like a long time. I like Greymane a ton, but being all in with no self-sustain requires being depending on my team too much. Nice thing about Greymane is you can solo camps and clear waves relatively quickly. So you can actually get into a point in the mid-game where you can just rotate around and provide map pressure, and then come to objectives at full health. And as the later the game goes, the scarier Greymane becomes because his health scaling is ridiculous. We're going to fast forward to the rest of the replay, because I was told once that if I don't show the core dying, regardless of what the point of the replay was, people will hate me. I doubt that's true, but with the ×8, dynamic here, we're gonna focus on the core here, because I'm pretty sure that the core will die. It's not real plant clearing; it's fast clearing. I mean, is it good to take the mono talent on Greymane? No. Actually, let me rephrase that. It is easy to run out of mana on Greymane if you're using his abilities too frequently and incorrectly, because you're not being patient with them, in which case it is kind of a training wheels talent, but it will make you develop bad habits. So, no. The other argument is that the other part of that is the other talents that tier are too strong, right? To justify having a training wheels talent taken instead of one of the talents that gives you more playmaking potential. If you're going Q build, you should absolutely go for the Q talent.